first of all say that I'm always a little bit daunted about the prospect of speaking about wisdom. There are a number of reasons for this, not the least of which is that it can be very easy to get into a kind of heady discussion or to make a heady presentation. I don't know why, but I've often found myself in situations where I'm talking about some aspect of Buddhist wisdom and it all seems to get stuck up here. And I'm determined that that shouldn't happen this evening, which is why I'm going to adopt the approach that I am going to adopt. I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. But let's just recap what has happened so far in this chapter. 2 weeks ago, Srila Pia gave a talk on one of the themes, I think just one of the themes from the Wisdom chapter. It's my brief this evening to complete the chapter for you. So he's very kindly left a whole range of topics for me to cover. 2 weeks ago, Srila Pia spoke about the Four Alliances. So what remains is quite a lot of material, and I won't be able to address all of that material in the course of this evening. It's far too much material. And in any case, I don't really want to start delving into the perfection of wisdom and shunyata and all that sort of thing. Interesting and fascinating, no doubt it is for quite a lot of people. It's the sort of thing which leads me into a sort of headspace that I can't escape from sometimes. So I'm going to leave that. What I'm going to try to do is weave together a number of the themes that occur in this chapter in the book into some kind of unity, into some kind of some kind of patchwork. I hope that, but I hope it'll be not just of theoretical or intellectual or rational interest to you, but it'll be of pragmatic interest. So, wisdom. It's very difficult actually to give a talk on the Dharma which in some way or other doesn't address the issue of wisdom. Any topic you pick up somehow or other relates to wisdom. You get the most simple, most basic Dharma talk, you might find yourself, for example, speaking about conditionality, conditioned co-production, the three lakshanas, that is to say the three characteristics of existence, and so on and so forth. You just can't avoid these topics because they're so woven into the fabric of Buddhist doctrine and practice. Nonetheless, my focus this evening will be on wisdom. But I wanted to be sort of fairly pragmatic. Now, if you've been coming along to these classes fairly regularly, you will remember that we have spoken on the three characteristics of conditioned existence. That is to say, impermanence, suffering or pain, unsatisfactoriness, and insubstantiality. And that's a manifestation that's one aspect of Buddhist wisdom. It's one way of describing things as they really are. You'll also perhaps have heard that when Surya Gupta, I think, spoke about the spiral path, that there's a stage on the spiral path, there's a stage on the Buddhist path, which is called knowledge and vision of things as they really are, or as they are in reality. The point in our experience of the Dharma where we actually see, really see, fully see how things are in reality. That you really do, for example, see that all things are subject to impermanence, that all conditioned things are insubstantial, that they are characterized by unsatisfactoriness. We may eventually reach this point, and this point is known as the point of no return. It's the point at which a permanent transformation of consciousness begins to take place. And it takes place because insight into the nature of reality has arisen. That insight, of course, is a manifestation, an experience, a direct experience of how things are in reality. It's an experience of wisdom. It's the arising of wisdom. And it's said in Buddhist tradition that it's this sort of experience which permanently changes your character for the better. Up until this point, we may have some sort of insight into these things, but they haven't really touched us sufficiently deeply to permanently transform for the better our consciousness. So that until we reach that point, we can fall back. We can fall back into unskillful mental states. We can even fall away from the Dharma altogether. So clearly, for all Buddhists, it's important to try to reach this point of no return. So Surya Gupta spoke a little bit about that a few weeks back. But I want to speak about this again this evening. I want to approach it from a particular point of view. Just a few weeks ago, I gave a talk on one of the order conventions that we just had. Every year or two, we have a large gathering of order members, and this year it's an international gathering. So there are 3 conventions. There's one for men, one for women, and one for men and women together. And I gave a talk on the men's convention. And yes, the brain cells are going off. I'm getting old. My short-term memory is not what it used to be. Proves the point, doesn't it? Okay, so it's a nightmare giving a talk without notes. You wonder where on earth you're going to end up. However, no, I've got my eyes set on my destination. One of the things I talked about on that occasion, on the men's convention, was how to approach stream entry. How do we approach stream entry? This came about partly because, inevitably, of course, if we've committed ourselves to the Dharma, we're trying to lead our lives in accordance with the Dharma to the fullest extent that we can, then we will naturally be concerned about reaching that crucial point. So how do we go about this? Now, there are lots of different ways you can go about this, and very often, however, they sort of tend to get identified with the development of insight when we're meditating. This is the rather narrow view that meditation is where insight is developed, and that insight arises mainly in the context of meditation, which is not entirely true. If you look at the whole of Buddhist tradition, you can see many, many instances where Buddhists of the past have have experienced the arising of insights outside the context of meditation. So there can be quite a broad approach to the development of insight, reaching this key point of the arising of wisdom in the mind, the wisdom which permanently transforms your character for the better, which is, if you like, the beginning of the opening up towards enlightenment. Now, many years ago, in this room, it was probably sometime in the early 80s, I think, the founder of Triratna, Sangharakshita, was holding a question and answer session just for the benefit of order members, and I happened to be present. And one of the questions that was put to him on that occasion really stirred my imagination. It wasn't my question, somebody else put the question. It wasn't a particularly weighty question, actually. It's the kind of pesky question we were always pestering him with. And it was this: how do you identify a stream entrant? That is to say, somebody who has reached this point of no return. Somebody who's directly experienced and seen things as they really are. Someone in whom that process of permanent transformation is already at work. How do you identify such a person? Of course, people wanted to know who these people might be as well, but we won't go into that. Fascinating sport though it is. It's not one I'm particularly keen on myself. But anyway, this question was put to him, and the answer he gave I thought was very, very interesting. He said, a stream entrant would be capable of responding to the objective needs of whatever given situation they found themselves in. Okay? A stream entrant would be capable of responding to the objective needs of whatever situation they found themselves in. Now, when I heard that, I immediately realised that I'd been given a teaching, if you like. And I took that teaching very much to heart. I decided, okay, if you're that serious about becoming a stream entrant in this life, you know what to do. Just put that into effect. Align your behaviour with the behaviour of a stream entrant. And then, sooner or later, hopefully, I too will become a stream entrant. That at least was a theory. And actually, it wasn't just a theory, it was the practice. I decided to take that on as a personal practice. And so I've taken that on as a personal practice ever since then. Now, we're talking about the early 80s, so it's been a long time. And I still try to put that into effect. And I still fail. Many, many times. And I will continue to fail many, many times, I don't doubt. But nonetheless, by degrees, gradually, I think I've managed to make some headway. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep at it, would I? Now, in order to sort of understand this better, of course, we have to understand quite clearly, well, what is meant by the objective needs of the situation? Everything hangs by that. So I want to, just give you a very, very simple example, just to give you a feel for what this might mean. So I'll describe a very, very common situation these days. Imagine me with a huge suitcase full of books. Because I'm trying to promote a book at the moment. I'm travelling around tree rattler centres promoting the book that I've written. So I have a suitcase full of books. Far more books than I'm ever likely to sell. Because I'm an eternal optimist. And I never learn. I'm a naive optimist. So I take far too many books away and bring a few less back with me. So what this means is every time I come up at the underground, at Bethnal Green Underground Station, there's all these steps to get up with my suitcase. So the last time I did this, I was beginning to struggle up these steps with about 30 kilos in my suitcase. And of course I had a rucksack on my back as well, just to make it a little bit more interesting. So as I was doing this, a young woman saw me, smiled, picked up the back end of my suitcase and said, "Okay, let's go." And so we did. We went up the steps remarkably quickly. So this is the sort of thing I mean. It's a very, very simple example. She saw that she responded to the objective needs of the situation. He was an old codger struggling up these steps with his suitcase, far too heavy for him. But she was young. She was energetic. She knew she could help me. She had the energy. She was positively, she's obviously in a positive mental state, a generous state of mind. So she picked up the back of my suitcase and helped me up. So she knew it was something she could do. Presumably she didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it because she just saw me and just immediately did it. She didn't think about it, she just responded. So that's a very, very simple example of the sort of thing that I'm getting at. Does that sort of help to make it clearer? Yeah? But there's quite a bit more that needs to be said about this to get an even better understanding. And that is, for a start, the objective needs of the situation doesn't just include what is needed to help others, for example. It also means taking into account your own objective needs, so that they don't, as it were, fall victim to the wider needs of whatever situation you're in. You have to take those into account as well. You have to know that it's not going. Whatever you're being called upon to do is not going to get in the way, to put it in a broader context, of your own development. It's something that you can do without that happening. So that's a very important sort of aspect of this that we need to understand. Okay, so hopefully you've got some feeling now for what this means, to be able to respond to the objective needs of whatever situation you find yourself in. Now, a stream entrant is capable of doing that in whatever situation they find themselves in, all the time. Always bearing in mind that they will have that rider in mind too. Well, is this going to get in the way of what I need to do? That sort of thing. So stream entrant is always going to be capable of doing that. We'll be able to assess whatever the needs of the given situation are and respond appropriately. So I want to illustrate this further by linking this up with the life of Sangharakshita. Because it was his 91st birthday on Friday, there's a special celebration here for that occasion. And I would like to make my own contribution to that celebration this evening. Because it seems to me, if I look back over his life, and I know him very, very well, I've spent much of my life with him, either living with him, working closely with him, working for him, or being on retreat with him, and so on and so forth, being on ordination courses with him in the early days. So I spent a lot of time with him. I know him very, very well, and he knows me very, very well. And if I look back over his life, it seems to me that here is someone who really has, in a big way, responded to the objective needs of whatever situation he seemed to find himself in. I think there are one or two quite spectacular examples of this which I'd like to mention. In fact, there are three things that I would like to, three events in his life which I'd like to point to, if I can remember all three of them. But the first one's very easy to remember. In 1956, Sangharakshita was on his way to Nagpur. Nagpur is in central India, and it's the place where Dr. Ambedkar converted to Buddhism. For those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Ambedkar was the first law minister of independent India. And he decided towards the end of his life that he was going to convert to Buddhism because he'd been born an untouchable. And in doing so, he knew that many other people from the community into which he was born would follow with him. And he followed him into Buddhism as well. And he saw this as a means of helping them, and also himself, to escape the stigma of the caste into which he was born, and therefore to alleviate a huge amount of human suffering. So in 1956, in October 1956, Dr. Ambedkar converted along with several 100,000 of his own followers, and the momentum of that conversion continues to this day. But unfortunately, a few weeks later, in December 1956, he died. And as Sangharakshita reached Nagpur on the train from Bombay, and he just decided to go to Nagpur on a whim, apparently. It wasn't anything he particularly planned. He just thought, well, he needed to go to Nagpur. He knew he had to go to Nagpur, so he went to Nagpur. And when he got there, he heard the news of Dr. Ambedkar's death. And he knew immediately what needed to be done, and he did it. He knew that all those people who'd converted with him in Nagpur, and elsewhere in India too, they needed to be consoled, and they needed to be encouraged to continue. In other words, to continue to value and use the gift that Dr. Ambedkar had given them. So over a period of 4 days, he gave in many, many different locations around the city of Nagpur, which is in central India, 30 different lectures, always to large, extremely large groups of people, all wanting to be consoled at the loss that they're experiencing. And it was a huge loss for them because he was dearly, dearly beloved by them. And to have lost him was a huge blow to every one of them. And I've met people in India who were there at that time, and they've spoken very much in these terms. They were almost inconsolable. But Sangharakshita was able to console them. More than that, he was able to inspire them to continue and to use the gift that Dr. Ambedkar had given them. So that, I think, is perhaps the most spectacular example that I can give from his life of him responding to the objective needs of the situation in which he found himself. And he didn't hesitate to do it. As soon as he heard the news, he knew, apparently, this is what he had to do. This was why he'd gone to Nagpur. And he made arrangements for all these various talks to be given. More or less, probably started pretty much on the spot, sort of thing you can do in India. So that's one example. Now, the second example was about to evade me. The brain cells have bounced back into action. I'm having a resurgent youth. Some years later, in 1963, I think it was, when he was still living in Kalimpong in India, just getting on with his own Buddhist life, writing, leading a very pleasant existence there, going down to the plains of India in the cool months on preaching tours, preaching to the newly converted Buddhisms in Maharashtra especially. He was quite content leading his life there, but sometime in 1963, I can't remember exactly when, he received a letter from London. And it was a request from Buddhists in Britain, as a senior-most British Buddhist monk, could he please return to London to help them because they were experiencing difficulties. And the difficulties that they're experiencing were, of course, with one another. People find it hard to get on, don't we? And so they've got themselves into quite a mess, apparently, and there are all sorts of disagreements and arguments, which has resulted in considerable disharmony in the sort of germinal Buddhist, well, it wasn't even a movement, but the germinal, amongst the germinal sort of Buddhists of Britain at that time, in 1963. So he consulted with his friends and teachers in Kalimpong and asked them what they thought. And apparently they unanimously agreed that, well, it sounded like he could do some good if he came back to the UK, at least just for a short while, to help them resolve all their difficulties. And so, again, even though it seemingly was against his own inclinations, he did that. He came back. He thought he was just coming back for 6 months, but of course in the end he stayed for 2 years. And then eventually just went back for a further 6 months to India to tidy up his affairs back there, and then returned to the UK to set up what is now the Sri Ratna Buddhist community. So again, he was responding to an objective need. It wasn't his problem, the problem was in London, but he was willing to go and do what he could to help resolve them. And as far as I'm aware, he did resolve them. But after he'd returned to India, of course, a new problem seemed to arise, and they decided they didn't want him to return to the UK, even though he'd told them all that he would return. But then again, of course, he saw again there was an objective need for him to return for different reasons this time. If Buddhism really was going to be established properly in the West, then he needed to go back. It was not going to be possible to continue on the same old basis that these two Buddhist groups had been continuing for some time. And so that led to the birth of the Sri Ratna Buddhist community. But that arose directly out of his willingness and ability to respond to an objective need. And ultimately you could say that need was our need. We need the Dharma. Beings need the Dharma. Everyone needs the Dharma, according to Milarepa. He sings a song about this. But he responded to that need. And as a consequence of that, this movement that you benefit from came into existence. It came into existence as a result of one person responding to the objective needs of the given situation. Okay, so moving on a little bit further. Until quite recently, actually, another sort of moment in his life where I think he did this in a way which was particularly difficult for him to do. He used to live in Birmingham. In fact, I was part of the community where he lived in Birmingham for many years. But he realised, or it occurred to him, that the Sri Ratna community was in need of a certain kind of stimulus. It needed a new project. And so he decided that, well, we would set up the big house that we lived in Birmingham, where the Majjhimaloka community was, where I lived. And we'd find a much bigger place, somewhere, ideally in a beautiful location, Well, it has to be in a beautiful location, which would serve as the sort of main focus for our movement, certainly in this country and even broader, wider field than that. Now, he decided to do this when he was he must have been in his late 80s at this point, mid to late 80s. And he'd had a very difficult 2 or 3 years where he'd suffered from chronic sleep deprivation. He'd managed to recover from that, and seemed to be in a very, his health seemed to be in a good state. But then there's the idea of this project. He knew that if this project was to succeed, because of the nature of the project itself, he would have to move there himself. It wasn't something he particularly wanted to do, but he could see a need. And he must have known, I'm sure, that to make that move at that stage of his life, given what had just happened to him over 2 or 3 years, it was all going to happen again, that he's going to suffer yet more sleep deprivation. For an elderly person to move house is a huge shift, and it's one which is beyond most people. It severely disorients most older people. And he must have known that. But he knew that if the project was to succeed, he would have to move. And he did. And sure enough, he suffered another nightmare period of sleep deprivation, which mercifully he seems to be finally emerging out of. Now, one of my young friends, who was staying at Hadistana, the new project, was helping to look after him. And to look after anybody, to be the carer of anybody, is never an easy thing. It's very demanding, and he was finding it really rather a bit too demanding. And he was finding that he was getting a little bit irritated and a little bit impatient. And in a way, he confessed all this to me, that he found it very difficult to do what was expected of him. But there was a problem for him. He said, I can't understand why Bhante needs all this and that and the next thing. He said, why does he need all these things? And he seems rather self-concerned. I said, well, actually, he said, oh, that's the question he put to me. He said, where's the transcendence? Where's the transcendence? And it seemed to me pretty obvious where the transcendence was, because he had deliberately put himself into a situation which was going to cause him difficulties, for the greater benefit of all of us, it seems to me. I pointed this out to my young friend, who could see it immediately and sort of felt ashamed at his own lack of empathy, I suppose. But in fairness to him, it can be difficult in that situation. I know what it's like. But again, I thought this illustrates the point I'm trying to get across, that he himself said a stream entrant is capable of responding to the needs of whatever situation they find themselves in. It seems to me, if I look back over his life, he has done that consistently. So if indeed what he says is true, that this would be how one would identify a stream entrant, well, it seems to me that he must be somewhere pretty close to that. I won't say more than that. I don't really want to get into speculation of that sort, but he does seem to exemplify his own teaching to a remarkable degree, it seems to me. He's not perfect, I know that. I spent a lot of time with him, but he's a pretty remarkable human being nonetheless. So this gives you some idea of how wisdom, if you like, manifests. I'm trying to link this up now with the book. In the section on prajna, which is the most common word in Buddhist literature for wisdom, he sort of pulls out 2 more dimensions of what prajna is. He relates them to compassion and to upaya, or skillful means. And these things are very, very... They're all different aspects of the same fundamental experience, really. So, according to Buddhist tradition, there is no true wisdom without compassion. But, of course, compassion is not just something you feel, it's something that motivates you, makes you act in a certain sort of way. And that will be in a way which benefits others. Now, in order to benefit others, you have to understand them a little bit, to a considerable degree, actually. And this is where upaya, or skillful means, comes into play. You have to go about your about what? You have to go about your business as a bodhisattva, let's say, sensibly. You have to give people what they need. You have to sort of provide them with something to which they can respond positively. And that, of course, means that you have to have some understanding of that. Now, I want to come back to Bhante's life again. Just one example this time, of his skillful means, or at least how it has struck me. Way back in the heady days of the early 70s, when I got involved in this movement, Bhante had long, greasy hair, sideburns down to here, Turkish puzzle rings all over his fingers, and he looked decidedly outlandish. He did not look like a respectable human being, I have to say, which had a certain romantic appeal to the youth of the times. We were hippies, or at least, well, I wasn't actually, but most of my friends were. I wasn't particularly hippie, but nonetheless, I was influenced by that culture. And he was this man who was 2 decades and a little bit more older than the rest of us, looking like sometimes almost like an aged hippie. Well, not quite. He always looked uniquely himself, oddly enough. But nonetheless, he had the long hair and the sideburns. He didn't have a beard. He looked rather strange. But there was something, nonetheless, which was very, very attractive to that. And I think the reason why he looked so just simply looked attractive towards us, to us, was the fact that he very obviously was not what you might call an establishment figure. He didn't look like a respectable human being. And that has a great appeal. To the young, I heard a very interesting talk on YouTube, it was yesterday, I think, where a young man was giving a very, very intelligent talk to a sizable gathering of people, most of whom were at least twice, if not 3 times his age. And they wanted to know, how do you attract young people to the kind of thing that they were interested in? And he made a very, very interesting point, which I think we can learn from. He said, well, look, what you're doing is not mainstream, is it? It's going against the establishment. It's going against the given wisdom of the times. Young people are really interested in that sort of thing. They don't like the establishment. They want to shake it all up. You know, the academic establishment, the political establishment, but there's another, the media. They like to change things. So they say, well, what you're doing is actually very much against the establishment. So that's what you should. That's how you should sell yourselves. That is attractive to young people. So that's why I became interested in these particular ideas. I'm not going to say what they were. But there's something of that flavour with Sangharakshita in the early days of this movement. He knew, presumably, that if he was going to establish a new Buddhist movement in the West, he would need young, energetic people. And so he knew, well, he went about deliberately, so it seems to me, he went about acting in a way which perhaps would be more likely to draw them in. When most of us, who'd sort of got involved in all this in our early 20s, had ordained and were burdened with commitments for the movement, the hair went, the sideburns went, and he looked like in the end, he looked like a respectable country gentleman. So, of course, this may be me reading far too much into his actions, but it just strikes me that way. I like to think of it in those ways anyway. Okay. Now, coming back to this book and what I'm actually supposed to be talking to you about, I'm supposed to be talking to you about wisdom. But I remember, I've been trying to do this in a particular way. The question might arise in your mind, well, how do you develop wisdom? Well, yes, if you sit down and meditate on impermanence, that will help. But it's only one thing you need to do. You need a broad base to your practice of the Dharma, which is why we emphasize Dharmanight, the development of spiritual friendship, the appreciation even of beauty, the fine arts, the beauties of nature, and so forth. Gaining a good understanding, a rational understanding of the Buddhist teaching, and then taking that up for reflection and acting in accordance with the principles of Buddhist ethics. All these things help to gradually move you in the direction of the development of wisdom. But as I said, I suppose in a way I've done all those things, and I still do those things. I will continue to do those things. But the single thing that I picked upon was to try myself to live my life according to, as fully as I could, to an attempt to respond to objective needs of whatever situation I found myself in. I think to some extent I've succeeded. I don't know. I mean, I know I've got a long way further to go, but it's one way of approaching wisdom. It's been my principal way, if you like, of trying to develop wisdom in my life. It's all about creating the necessary conditions for insight in which to arise, or for wisdom in which to arise, and of course that has also involved reflection on impermanence and other topics which help to bring this about. Something else I want to say about. Oh yes, this process that I've been talking about, it seems to me, isn't something that is going to happen like that overnight. It's something which happens gradually. Again, if I look back over my own life, I can see there's been a gradual shift. That I've gradually, very, very slowly, by degrees, become a better human being. But it's happened slowly by degrees. I know I've got a lot further to go, but I can see that kind of progress has been made. Whether or not there's any insight there, I wouldn't know, and I don't care to inquire. But it's moving in the right direction. I think that's what all of us need to do, really. We can become a little bit too concerned about specifically trying to develop insight. Think more in terms of a broad general approach. A number of different avenues, all converging on one point eventually. That way, I suspect we will be far more likely to succeed. Now, there's one more point I want to make this evening before pausing for questions. There's a little bit of time left. Simply, partly because it occurs in the text. I hadn't read this book for quite some time, but I was quite surprised to see it and delighted to see it. Right towards the end of this chapter on wisdom, there's about a page and a half on gratitude and the connection between gratitude and wisdom, and gratitude and the wise. The Tathagatas are grateful for the perfection of wisdom. The perfection of wisdom is as a figure, is a female Buddha or Bodhisattva. But they're all the Tathagatas, the enlightened, are grateful for the perfection of wisdom. They respond to the perfection of wisdom with gratitude. And I've been myself thinking a lot about gratitude over the last few years, really. Partly because, I suppose gratitude is such a beautiful human emotion, one of the most beautiful, it seems to me. I've said this, if you've been to classes where I've given talks before, you've probably heard me say all this before, but I don't tire of saying it. Gratitude is one of the most beautiful of human emotions. It's one of the most beautiful emotions to experience. If you really can feel your heart filled with gratitude, it's a wonderful experience. It's very, very uplifting. And I had a very, very pronounced experience of this when I did my 9-month solitary retreat. It just emerged one day very, very strongly. It was the one sort of feature of my retreat which was consistently positive. gratitude was the underlying positive emotion that I experienced. It was the one which surfaced most strongly. It was the one which was most frequently at hand. I felt grateful for so much. And I felt grateful above all to Bhante, my teacher, for everything that he's given me. This seems to be so characteristic of Buddhist tradition. I especially have noticed it in the Milarepa, who some of you will be aware he was Tibet's great yogi. He was also Tibet's greatest poet. And his poetry, he would sing his poems, he would sing songs. And his songs have been translated into English. And on my long solitary retreat, I went through the songs several times, very slowly, just before going to bed at night. But every single song he sings begins with an expression of his appreciation to his teacher, Marpa, his gratitude to Marpa for having made his Buddhist life possible. And so gratitude is a very, very important emotion within Buddhist tradition, within Buddhist experience. It's just one aspect, if you like, of metta. I remember it wasn't the first time I actually met Bhante and sat talking with him, but I think probably the second time. I'd only known him for a few weeks, but already I'd felt a deep, deep sense of gratitude to him for effectively saving my life, frankly, without going into the details of all that. But I remember on this occasion I went to see him in his flat in Muswell Hill. This would have been I think it was in September 1972. Long-term memory is good. And I felt I had to take something, I had to give him something. I didn't know what to give him. I wasn't very imaginative about this sort of thing, but I knew I had to give him something. I wanted to give him something. So the best thing I could come up with was to collect a few pears which were right on the tree in the garden of the house I was living in West Hampstead at that time. And I took a big bag of pears and presented it to him, which he received very graciously. But it very kindly actually. It was heartfelt. It sprung from the gratitude that I felt for him, and which I continue to feel actually to this day. And I can't imagine that would ever go. But I think there's a particular reason. Well, I know that there are several reasons, but one that occurs to me why gratitude is connected with wisdom. It seems to me that if you're grateful for something, well, you value the thing that you're grateful for. In other words, you can be objective about it. You can see, you can perceive, you can experience its objective value. And that is why you have this heartfelt response towards it, or towards the person that has given you the gift that you've received. I feel tremendous gratitude to him for the gift he's given me. Milarepa felt tremendous gratitude for the gift that Marpa had given him. The Dalits, those who are so-called ex-untouchables in India, feel oceans of gratitude to Dr. Ambedkar for the gift that he gave to them. But you can only feel that if you can see the value of the thing that you've received. So it calls for a certain kind of awareness. And if you can see the value of the Dharma and experience the value of the Dharma, well, surely that you can see how there's a connection there with wisdom. So yes, I wanted to make that particular connection. That's my own connection. It's not what Bhante says in the book. He's speaking about the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas specifically, but it is interesting that even the enlightened can feel, it seems, gratitude. Those who are wise. Right. Maybe I should pause. I've spoken for quite a long time without letting you question it. Just take a few moments and see if there's anything that you'd like to ask me about, anything I've said, anything that needs further clarification. Yes.
Kind of a cheeky question.
Come on.
Is wisdom a function of age?
No, definitely not. I mean, I think that a lot of very unwise older people. one would hope that as people get older, that they become wiser. But it's manifestly obvious a lot of older people don't seem to learn very much from the course of their lives, I'm afraid. I think that wisdom comes to those who make efforts to develop it, or who try to make something of their lives. In other words, try to become better human beings. If you become a better human being, you will, as a natural course, throughout the course of your life that is, you will gain experience which will be useful and helpful to those who are younger than you. But it will only happen if you make that effort. And I believe that anyone sincerely practicing the Dharma over a lifetime will have a lot to give to other people, and especially to young people.
I suppose at the heart of the question is the recognition that there's this sort of cycle that happens where you feel that you're making progress, and then you experience something that sets you back.
Yeah.
And so while you may have glimpses of wisdom or feeling insight, it's very easy to fall back, and a sense of frustration that continually happens.
Yes, and I think that I've seen this happen many, many times with people. I've experienced it myself. But I think one thing I've learned over the decades is that you have to be patient. And patience is the most difficult virtue of all to develop, and especially for young people. It's difficult enough for old men like me, but it's particularly difficult for the young. And especially, I would say, in this society, because we live in a society where you can have whatever you want on demand, which I think is a terrible, terrible burden to have, because it gives rise to all sorts of expectations, unreal expectations. And so people will come along to the centre with unreal expectations. They'll take up the practice of meditation with unreal expectations. They want it to deliver straight away. Well, it can't, and it won't. You might have some wonderful experiences, but try and sustain them. It's not easy. It calls for effort. It calls for application. You don't want to hear this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Yes, when I was young, I was very impatient, and I wanted to become enlightened. Shortly after I was ordained. Why bother getting ordained otherwise? But it takes a while. Probably takes many lifetimes, I suspect. But I'd like, since you've raised this point, I'm quite interested in this. I'd like to say something about it. Are old people wise? We live in a society where age and experience, frankly, is undervalued. It's not valued at all. We live in a youth culture, and it's young people are where it's at. And if you're old like me, well, you've had your day. Just be grateful for what you've had and quietly disappear, sort of thing. Especially my generation. But I had a very, very striking experience some years ago in India when I taught at Nagaloka for the first time. Nagaloka is in Nagpur. It's where we have a very, very large centre for young Dalits, and we organise 8-month Dharma courses for them. And I've done a lot of teaching at Nagaloka over the recent years. But the first time I went there, I can't remember how old I was, but I was already considered to be an old man. It had a thoroughly rejuvenating effect upon me. Partly because I think that old people like me need the stimulus of youth. We need to sort of mix with youthful optimism. Young people are at the outset of their lives. They've got everything before them. They're not sort of in any way tainted by the bitterness of experience, or at least not to any significant degree. And I think it's very, very refreshing for old codgers like me to come into contact with that sort of thing. But I think the other side of this is that I had something to give. And the young people that I was coming into contact with could sense that. And I couldn't get enough of them, and they couldn't get enough of me. And we had a mutually beneficial impact upon each other's lives. Now, for me, there's an important principle emerges out of that, or principles. It seems to me that old people need young people, but young people need old people. And that is not widely understood these days. But it's not just any old people. It has to be old people who can give the benefits of their experience, of a positive experience of life, a positive vision of life. Yes?
Going back to the idea of wisdom, this is about being wise in a situation. So you can't say, like, that person's wise as if they're always wise. It's how they manifest it, what they choose.
Yeah.
They're choosing this objective.
Yeah. I think most human beings, even experienced human beings, even some with just a hint of wisdom, have got blind spots. I've got mine. My friends know perfectly well what they are. I'm always getting into trouble. I've said recently, I'm always getting into trouble. I will still get into trouble, I know. But anyway, coming back to your question, I think that the way prajna manifests is that you've got two aspects of Buddhist wisdom. Let's say there's what's called jnana, which is a sort of realization, a state of realization. You've realized the ultimate nature of things. The prajna is the activity of that jnana, that knowledge, that understanding, so that there's a circumstance that calls forth the jnana in somebody. So it's like a way of responding to an objective need. It's not something which can be quantified. It's just like a particular response, the most appropriate response perhaps that you could imagine to any given situation. And I think for me that in Sangharakshita's life manifested so beautifully when he found himself in Nagpur like that. He just knew immediately what had to do. It was the response of wisdom, but he also had knowledge, experience to give to the benefit of those people that needed it. You've raised a very, very big and deep question, one which actually places me well out of my depths, but it's all right, that's not a problem. That's just a confession on my part, but or an admittance, I should say. But there's lots more that could be said about that. But hopefully that will serve for the moment. You know the story of Kissa Gotami? Do any of you know that story of the Buddha and Kissa Gotami? Some of you do. I probably don't have time to really recount it, but basically he responded to the needs of a young woman who just lost her son, but in a very particular way, in a way which helped her to see that her son was not going to come back to life, and that actually it wasn't just her son who was subject to death and impermanence. All living beings are. And as a consequence of that, she eventually became enlightened. But it was, so that was wisdom in action, if you like. It's also compassion. It's also skillful means. But as I say, you can't really separate these things out completely from one another. They're all sort of aspects of a particular, way of being, manifestation of consciousness. Wisdom in the Buddhist sense is something you can't actually grasp. The texts warn us about this as well, by the way. Any last final point, comment, question? We're almost out of time. We'll have one more if you like, otherwise we'll leave it there.
I think we have a thunderous silence.
Sorry?
We have a thunderous silence.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Well, I have one. Sorry.
That's fine. No problem. You spoke too soon.
No, just pondering, just a general one about, are we in the West is that, I mean, Buddhism comes from the East, so is it sort of almost antithetical? Are we too difficult? You know, when you talk about, when you live in youth culture, and when you talk about we, you're talking about we here in the West, and it almost feels like a terrible sadness to, you know, we can't be wise, we can't be skillful, we can't. It's like, you know, no matter how old we are, young, old. I'm in the middle of my life, and it feels already quite an achievement to get to 50 and go, oh, you know, God, that's exciting, and I'm still not wise, and it all sounds like an unachievable abstract.
But you're excited. At 50, you're excited.
It's exciting to
But that's
alive.
But you're excited.
Yes.
Not many 50-year-olds are. Congratulations. No, that's good. That's the sort of, that's a very positive thing. It suggests to me that you're heading in the right direction.
Oh, no, yes.
That's all any of us can do. Now look, I did in a way, I did speak rather critically of the society in which we live. I was pointing to the disadvantages that we're up against, but there are also many pluses. So my apologies for not having pointed to them. The fact that you are sitting here in this room this evening is a very positive thing, and say something positive about the society in which we live. I'd better stop there, otherwise I'll put my foot in it again. And I'd like to stop on a positive note. Okay? So next week, come back and hear all about the cosmic significance of the Bodhisattva.